We are living in one of the most corrupt countries in the world. You heard me right. According to a corruption perception index by Transparency International, Mexico is the 124th most corrupt country in the world, right next to Bolivia and Kenya. But what exactly is corruption? Some people say that corruption is basically the abuse of power, or as stated in the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, corruption is a complex social, political, and economic phenomenon that affects all countries and causes slow economic development. How would you define corruption?
I think corruption is when government officials and people in power take advantage of that for their own benefit.
Corruption can be seen in bribery, nepotism, fraud, and many other ways, which violates our rights. Human and social rights are indivisible and interdependent. But corruption contravenes this by not letting us express our rights like freedom of speech, right of education, access to healthcare, and so others. If politicians divert funds so they can keep the money, this affects not only the economy of our country, but also our rights. There won't be enough funds for IMSS affecting the health of every single person in this country. In the case of political rights, we might think that we exert them just by voting and participating in political affairs, but it's not just that. This whole sector also encompasses the right of access to information, which in Mexico has been manipulated, so we don't notice all the corruption being made until the politician mandate period is over. Have you ever heard about the case of Mexico City Subway Línea 12 or Colegio Enrique Rebsamen, and what can you tell me about them?
Yeah, I heard about them. There were like buildings and infrastructure that was constructed by the government and fell. One was because of the earthquake and one was because of poor maintenance.
Therefore, it is so important to fight corruption. If we don't act against corruption, we'll continue living in an insecure and unfair country, a country without medicines in the healthcare system, poorly made constructions, politicians giving jobs to friends and family. These are just some examples of why we need to fight against corruption. Just imagine living in a place where you can feel safe anywhere you go, or have an honest government which you can trust in every single decision they make for this country. This is what we all would like to have, so we must act that way to achieve it. To make that possible, some tools needed to combat corruption, as I said before, is pairing up with anti-corruption associations like Mexicanos contra la Corrupción or CACNL, which is an executive secretariat of the state anti-corruption system in Nuevo León, which helps to sanction and report corruption in our country and demand our rights. Another really important tool is education and at home and school. Those early years are where children develop their ideologies, ethics, and values, so we guide them in the right path. The newer generation will see corruption as something wrong, and they know that it should be punished. Do you know any associations against corruption in Mexico?
No, I don't know any.
You might have heard about the collective action theory. This is a model that explains corruption. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, what happens is that people are aware of the negative effects of corruption, but they also know that they have corrupt officials. So it doesn't make sense to only be the honest persons if everyone else is being corrupt. This leads to the normalization of corruption in every single level possible. The only way to combat corruption in this position is by forming alliances, and that's why it's called the collective action theory. That's why corruption can be seen from a single disciplinary perspective. It includes politics, economics, and other branches. Each disciplines complements each other, like economic and political corruption are heavily connected when having a project. For example, the most expensive project is always the one chosen due to the complexity of keeping control and accessibility to manipulate contracts and salaries. This causes corruption in construction and loss of trustworthiness to the government. In a study by Swamy in 1999, he found out that business whose bosses and managers were women experienced a lower perception of bribes. Additionally, in countries with high levels of political participation of women are associated with low levels of corruption. Such differences are enough proof to propose an increase in the political participation of women to reduce the levels of corruption, and this study case exemplifies anti-corruption at its finest. The results were positive, and although this experiment was only hypothetical, it can be a possible solution to reduce corruption and fight for gender equality. Do you think having more women in political participation will reduce corruption, and how come?
I think it wouldn't reduce corruption because I think the women that get into power are just as corrupt as other men.